The airport lounge hummed with the steady drone of jet engines and the erratic chatter of thousands in transit. Alex Rivera sat near the glass, his laptop screen casting a sharp blue glow against the terminal lights. Around him, travelers leaned back to scroll through feeds, swiping past filtered images of sunsets and crowded beaches. Alex did not look up. His fingers moved in a measured, rapid cadence, tracking the fluctuating lines of his portfolio. He watched the numbers shift, calculating gains against the backdrop of a departing flight announcement. While the crowd lived for the immediate thrill of the next destination, Alex was anchored to a different reality. Every keystroke was a move toward an acquisition. He ignored the screen of the passenger beside him, who was busy curating a travel story for strangers. Alex closed a tab, opened a ledger, and tightened his focus. The world outside the glass was a temporary waypoint. His real work was happening in the digital space, where assets were being built, not just spent. He was a traveler by circumstance, but a strategist by design. In this sea of movement, he remained still, his attention fixed solely on the performance of his capital. Years earlier, the reality was different. Alex sat in a cramped office chair, lines of code scrolling across his monitor until his eyes burned. He was a freelance developer, trading hours for a high income that seemed substantial at the time. In those days, he kept a close watch on his social circle. His peers were living for the moment, checking into luxury hotels and booking experiences that vanished as soon as they ended. He watched them drain their bank accounts on transient pleasures, convinced that the next paycheck would always arrive. Alex did the math. He saw the pattern clearly. They were running on a treadmill that never stopped. If they paused their work, the money stopped. If they lost their clients, the lifestyle collapsed overnight. It was a fragile existence, anchored to the constant exchange of his own limited time for cash. He sat in his quiet apartment, staring at his balance, realizing that high income was not the same as true stability. Every hour he billed felt like a piece of his future being sold off. He felt the weight of the trade-off. He needed a way to break the cycle before one of the treadmill wore him down entirely. The turning point arrived on a rainy Tuesday, tucked away in the pages of a worn book by Napoleon Hill. Alex read until the words blurred, then read them again. The central premise hit him with the force of a physical impact. Freedom without a plan was nothing more than a temporary escape. He paced the length of his small room, the floorboards creaking under his weight. The realization was sharp. If he continued to bill hours, he would remain a prisoner of his own production, no matter how far he traveled. He stopped his pacing and looked at the wall, visualizing a different path. He decided then that his future would no longer be a series of disconnected projects. His endeavor had to serve two masters. It had to fund his immediate movement through the world, and it had to feed a growing engine of wealth. He pulled out a notebook, sketching out a new framework for his days. He would stop chasing the next contract for the sake of the cash and start building a foundation that functioned independently of his labor. The transition was immediate. He shut down his old freelance habits, cleared his desk, and started the systematic construction of a financial fortress. The goal was no longer the travel itself, but the creation of a life that could sustain his presence anywhere on Earth. The divergence started with the rent. While his peers migrated toward luxury high-rises and boutique hotels, Alex sought the opposite. He moved into modest, functional apartments that offered little beyond a desk and a view. The difference in overhead was immediate. Each month, while his friends boasted about upgraded lifestyles and expensive experiences, Alex checked his accounts. He lived with a deliberate, calculated austerity. He refused to let his rising income dictate his spending habits. Every surplus dollar was treated as a recruit in an army he was building. He steered these funds away from luxury items and into the cold, predictable machinery of index funds and dividend stocks. He watched the numbers grow on his screen not as money to be spent, but as capital to be deployed. The gap between his life and theirs widened with every passing quarter. They were consuming their potential while he was converting his labor into equity. He walked past high-end retailers without a glance. His mind focused entirely on the yield of his latest purchase. He was not just saving. He was systematically stripping his life of non-essential weight to fuel a machine that would eventually pay him to exist. The discipline was invisible to the outside world, but to him, it was a daily, physical commitment to a future that had not yet arrived. Saving was only the defensive layer. Alex knew he needed a fence. He identified a gap in the digital market, and spent 3 weeks coding a simple, automated tool. It was his first foray into true ownership. The launch was a disaster. The server crashed, code errors mounted, and he spent 48 hours straight, coffee-fueled, hunting down bugs in the dark. He did not quit. He patched the system, optimized the architecture, and relaunched. This time, the first dollar trickled in without his direct input. Then 10, then 50. It was a modest amount, but it changed everything. He watched the dashboard update in real time, the data proving that his labor could be decoupled from his time. He repeated the process, refining the model, stripping away the friction, and scaling the infrastructure. He built a second venture, then a third, using the same systematic logic. The machine was no longer a theory. It was a physical reality on his screen. He saw the revenue streams begin to overlap, creating a buffer that protected him from the volatility of his old freelance life. He was no longer trading hours for bread. He was building assets that worked while he slept. The momentum was palpable, the foundation hardening with every successful deployment. He stood up from his desk, the screen glowing, and realized the path was now locked in. The Mediterranean sun hit the table, turning the ceramic plate to white heat. Around him, the cafe hummed with the sound of vacation clinking glasses, laughter, and the distant rhythm of waves crashing against the pier. Alex ignored it all. His eyes were locked on the fluctuating lines of his latest asset performance chart. A shadow fell over his screen. It was his friend, holding 2 iced drinks, looking at the laptop with a mix of confusion and irritation. He pulled up a chair and tapped the edge of the screen with a fingernail. The sound was sharp, cutting through the ambient noise. Why are you staring at numbers in paradise? The beach is 10 meters away, the water is perfect, and you are acting like a clerk in a basement. The friend gestured to the crowd, pointing out people living for the moment, basking in the light. You have the money, Alex. You have the freedom to be anywhere. Why spend your time here, buried in columns and rows, while the actual life you are working for is happening right in front of you? The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of the surrounding joy. Alex did not look at the ocean. He looked at the data, his fingers hovering over the keys, feeling the pressure of the moment. Alex turned the laptop slowly, sliding it across the table until the glow of the charts reflected in his friend's eyes. He did not defend the work. He pointed to the rows of compounding interest and the steady climb of passive revenue streams. Freedom is not the goal, he said, his voice calm, cutting through the surrounding laughter. Ownership is. He watched his friend try to process the numbers, the confusion fading into a slow, dawning realization. Freedom is a trap, Alex continued, tapping the screen. It depends on your ability to keep working, to keep chasing, to keep showing up. If you stop, the freedom stops. But ownership? Ownership creates security that outlasts your effort. It survives when you are tired. It grows while you sleep. It persists when you choose to do nothing at all. The ambient noise of the cafe seemed to recede, leaving only the weight of his words. He was not describing a balance sheet. He was describing a fortress. The friend looked from the screen to the ocean, then back to the data. The social pressure evaporated, replaced by a quiet, heavy clarity. Alex closed the lid with a firm click. He had finally articulated the architecture of his life, and in that moment, the choice was absolute. The philosophy took root. Alex stopped chasing singular projects and started building a machine. He took the first successful venture and used its revenue to feed the second, then the third. He was no longer trading hours for dollars. He was trading assets for more assets. One business became 3, then 5, then 7 distinct streams of income flowing into a single, centralized reservoir. Each stream required a different strategy, a different set of risks, and a different rhythm of maintenance. He monitored them with surgical precision, closing accounts that stagnated and pouring capital into the ones that scaled. The complexity grew, but the system held. He began to look at every decision through a generational lens, asking not what a dollar could buy today, but what that same dollar could compound into over 20 years. Sacrifices that once felt like deprivation now functioned as fuel. He ignored the lifestyle creep that claimed his peers. Every surplus was locked away, reinvested, and multiplied. The momentum turned, shifting from a slow, grinding climb to an exponential surge. His net worth began to move with a life of its own, rising while he slept, rising while he traveled, rising while he stood perfectly still. The machine was no longer something he operated, it was something he owned. The oceans stretched to the horizon, a vast expanse of blue visible through the glass of his balcony. Alex sat in the quiet of his apartment, the only sound the rhythmic pulse of the tide against the shore. On his screen, the financial statements displayed figures that would have once seemed impossible. Multi-millions. A landscape of assets built from years of discipline. He scrolled through the accounts, not looking for the thrill of the total, but confirming the structural integrity of the machine he had forged. The numbers were high, yes, but they were merely indicators. The real payoff arrived in the silence of the room. It was the absence of urgency. It was the knowledge that the system he built did not need his input to survive. He leaned back, watching the light shift across the water, and felt the weight of genuine security settle into his shoulders. The nomadic years had served their purpose. They were the scaffolding for this foundation. He had traded the volatility of the hunt for the permanence of ownership. Every sacrifice, every redirected dollar, and every hour of meticulous oversight had culminated in this exact perspective. He had earned the right to stop running, not because he was tired, but because he had finally built something that would never need to stop. He looked back at the younger version of himself, the one who moved through airports with nothing but a laptop and a desperate need for movement. Back then, he thought he was running away. He believed the system was a cage to be escaped. He was wrong. The system was not a cage, it was a set of rules. He had not escaped it at all, he had mastered it. He had taken the transient nature of his travels and bound them to the gravity of real assets. Every mile traveled had been a lesson in logistics. Every transaction had been a brick in a wall that now stood taller than any obstacle he had ever feared. He had built a system of his own, a self-sustaining engine that would outlive the man who designed it. The exotic landscapes he once sought were now just memories, the backdrop of a life that had moved beyond the need for constant change. He had converted the uncertainty of his 20s into a foundation for generations he would never meet. The nomadic journey had ended, but the adventure of ownership was only just beginning. He stood up, closed the screen, and walked toward the light. He had not just survived the world, he had left it better than he found it.